Miles stood in front of the gallery's imposing glass doors, the weight of his portfolio pressing against his chest like 1,000 unsaid words. His heart beat louder than the city's distant hum, but he took a deep breath, pushing his anxiety aside. This was his chance. After years of painting in his small Brooklyn apartment, after hours of grueling work, this gallery, one of the most prestigious in the city, might finally give him the recognition he deserved. He adjusted his jacket, brushed his fingers through his short hair, and walked inside. The gallery was sleek, modern, and minimalist. White walls stretched endlessly, adorned with vibrant and abstract paintings from artists he had long admired. The air smelled faintly of fresh paint and expensive coffee. Every inch of the space was meticulously curated, the silence almost sacred. In the middle of it all, behind a polished desk, sat Jessica Calloway, the gallery's owner. Her reputation preceded her, sharp, efficient, and unyielding. She was a gatekeeper in the art world, and getting past her was a challenge most aspiring artists could only dream of. "Hello," Miles said, his voice steady, despite the nerves crawling up his spine. "I'm Miles Carter. I'd like to present my work." Jessica glanced up from her tablet, briefly assessing him before looking back down, clearly unimpressed. She was in her mid-40s, with high cheekbones and perfectly styled blonde hair. A crisp white blouse and black slacks made her appear both elegant and untouchable. Miles had heard the stories, how she had dismissed countless talented artists over the years, often in a manner so dismissive it left them questioning their entire creative existence. But he couldn't let that deter him. "I'm afraid we're not accepting submissions right now," Jessica said without looking up, tapping her pen against the desk, almost as if she were bored by the very idea of considering new talent. "We have a full roster." Miles felt his pulse quicken, but he refused to be discouraged. "I understand, but I believe my work might be different," he said, setting his portfolio down on the desk. "I just need a chance." Jessica glanced at the portfolio for a split second, then back at him. Her expression remained cold, almost predatory. "You believe your work is different?" she asked, her voice flat. "What makes you think so?" Miles hesitated. He wasn't sure how to put it into words. He didn't just paint, he felt each brushstroke, as if the paintings came from something deep inside him, something otherworldly. His art was a channel for a force he hadn't yet fully understood, but one he felt every time he created. Every piece carried a story of its own, a power that even he was still learning to control. But Jessica wasn't interested in his explanation. She picked up the portfolio with a hint of disdain and flipped it open. The paintings were abstract, yet each one had an undeniable intensity. Bold swaths of color, chaotic patterns, and intricate layers, each piece told a story, but not in a way that was immediately accessible. They challenged the viewer to look deeper, to understand something beyond the surface. "I see," Jessica said, her lips curling into a slight, condescending smile. She flipped through the pages faster now, her eyes scanning the art with a cold, clinical precision. "It's interesting, I suppose. But not quite right for our gallery. It's too," she paused, as if searching for the right word. "Too aggressive, too raw. Your work lacks the sophistication we look for." Miles felt the sting of her words like a slap. It wasn't just that she didn't like his art, it was the way she reduced it to something lacking, as if his soul's expression was nothing more than a rough sketch that didn't fit her idealized vision of what art should be. He could feel his hands trembling, but he fought to keep his composure. "I understand," Miles said, his voice quieter now, the sharpness of her words cutting deeper than he cared to admit. "I thought, maybe you could see past the surface. My art is more than just what's in front of you." Jessica scoffed, looking at him as if he were a child trying to explain a complex idea. "You sound like you've read one too many art theory books." "Listen, it's not personal. It's just business. Your work doesn't fit with our brand." She stood up, signaling that the conversation was over. "I'm sure you'll find somewhere else for it. But you won't find success here." Her words hit him like a brick. The gallery owner had dismissed him, not because of his talent, but because of her narrow view of what was valuable. Miles gathered his things, his heart sinking, but before he left, he couldn't resist one final look at his portfolio. He had brought his best work, each piece a reflection of his journey, his struggles, and his triumphs. But to Jessica, it was just another failed attempt, a story not worth telling. As he stepped back into the cold streets of the city, Miles felt the weight of her dismissal settle on his shoulders. He couldn't deny the feeling that she hadn't seen what was right in front of her. His art wasn't just about color and brushstrokes, it was a manifestation of something deeper, something ancient. But he couldn't explain that to someone who couldn't understand. In the days that followed, Miles sank into a quiet rage. He spent hours in his studio, surrounded by half-finished canvases, each one more intense than the last. It was as if something inside him was pushing him, driving him to paint with a ferocity he hadn't known he possessed. The rejection had ignited a fire that would soon burn brighter than anything he had ever created. But what Jessica didn't know, what no one knew, was that his art held more power than they could possibly imagine. It wasn't just his creativity on the canvas, it was the channeling of something far more terrifying. Something hidden, waiting to be unleashed. As Miles stood in front of his latest piece, his fingers grazing the surface of the canvas, a strange sensation washed over him. It was as if the painting itself was alive, pulsing with energy, ready to reveal its true nature. He didn't know it yet, but this was only the beginning. His art was destined to change everything, both for him and for the world. And soon, the gallery that had rejected him would find out just how wrong they were to overlook him. The night after his rejection, Miles sat in his studio, the soft hum of his music mixing with the ambient street noises filtering through the cracked window. He had always painted at night. There was something about the quiet of the city after dark, the loneliness, that made his art come alive. The world outside felt distant, almost irrelevant, as he focused on the canvas before him. But tonight, something felt different. The rejection from Jessica still gnawed at him. He couldn't shake her dismissive tone, the way she had undermined everything he believed in. It wasn't just about the gallery or the opportunity, it was about the way she had belittled his work, as though it were insignificant. And yet, he couldn't help but wonder, why did her rejection hurt so much? The answer came in flashes, like fragments of a dream he couldn't fully grasp. His hand trembled as he dipped the brush into his paint, the familiar motion almost meditative. But this time, as the brush touched the canvas, something stirred inside him, something ancient and powerful. It felt like a pulse, a surge of energy, that he couldn't ignore. Miles stepped back, startled. The colors on the canvas began to swirl in a way that defied his intentions. The red, the blue, and the yellow didn't just blend together as they normally would, they merged into a new shape, a shape he hadn't planned. It was as if the canvas itself was breathing, alive, responding to his touch. For a moment, Miles stood frozen. He had never seen anything like this before. It was like the painting was showing him something beyond the ordinary. He wasn't just creating the artwork, it was creating itself, reacting to his emotions, his thoughts, his deepest instincts. The more he painted, the more he felt an overwhelming sense of connection, as if the brushstrokes were communicating directly with him. He wasn't sure what was happening, but he could sense the power in it. This isn't just art, he thought, as the lines on the canvas seemed to shift and pulse in time with his heartbeat. It was as if the painting was a key, unlocking something within him, something he had buried deep for years. His thoughts drifted back to his childhood, to the strange dreams he'd had, the ones where he felt he could move objects with his mind, where he could bend the world around him to his will. He had dismissed them as nothing more than vivid fantasies, signs of a restless imagination. But now, staring at the canvas before him, a part of him wondered if those dreams had been something more. Something real. Miles paused, wiping his forehead with the back of his hand. He had never believed in the supernatural, never thought that he could have anything beyond ordinary human abilities. But now, in the silence of his studio, as his paintings came to life before his eyes, he couldn't ignore the feeling that something was changing within him. The more he painted, the more the connection grew. It wasn't just the brushstrokes or the colors, it was a presence, an energy that seemed to wrap around him, to infuse itself into the very essence of his being. It was a force older than humanity itself, a force that had been dormant in him for years, waiting to be awakened. And with every stroke, with every image, it grew stronger, more defined. As the hours passed, the painting before him began to take on a new dimension. The figures he had painted earlier now seemed to move, shifting within the frame as though alive. The lines he had carefully crafted now held meaning, like symbols etched into the fabric of reality. Miles felt his pulse quicken, his breath shallow as the realization hit him. This is what I'd been searching for. This power, the one that had always been there, buried deep within him, was now surfacing, unraveling in ways he couldn't have anticipated. The canvas before him was no longer just an art piece, it was a portal, a gateway to something much larger. He reached out, hesitant at first, his fingers grazing the surface of the painting. It tingled beneath his touch, sending a jolt of electricity through his arm. He pulled back instinctively, his heart racing. But the sensation didn't fade, it lingered, drawing him in. He could feel it now, the raw power within the paint. It wasn't just his creativity or his talent, it was something beyond that, something otherworldly. Miles closed his eyes, focusing on the sensation. He was no longer just an artist. He was a conduit, a channel for something far greater than himself. In the quiet of his studio, as the painting continued to shift and change in front of him, Miles felt an overwhelming sense of awe. What is this? He thought. What is this power? He didn't have all the answers, but he knew one thing for sure, his life had just changed. This wasn't just about art anymore, it was about unlocking a power hidden deep within him, a power that had been waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. And the more he delved into this newfound talent, the more he realized just how dangerous it could be. The power in his paintings wasn't just a gift, it was a weapon. A weapon that could reshape reality itself. But with that realization came another thought, what do I do with this power? For the first time in his life, Miles felt like he was standing at the precipice of something enormous. He had the ability to change the world, not just through his art, but through the very forces of nature itself. The question now wasn't whether he could control it, it was whether he should. The days that followed were a blur. Miles painted, explored, and tested the limits of his newfound abilities. Each stroke on the canvas felt like a pulse of energy, a spark of life. He could feel the world shifting around him, as though his paintings were reaching out, touching something beyond his understanding. But no matter how far he pushed himself, he could never quite shake the feeling that there was more to this power than he could comprehend. He wasn't just unlocking his own potential. He was tapping into something ancient, something that had been hidden away for centuries, waiting for the right person to find it. And Miles knew, deep down, that he was that person. The days blurred together, each one spent in a haze of paint, brushstrokes, and the palpable energy that seemed to surround Miles at all times. The world outside his studio had become irrelevant, the bustling streets of Brooklyn, the passing strangers, the faint hum of city life, all of it felt distant, as though he was now living in a realm entirely of his own creation. And yet, something was stirring within him, something deeper, something he hadn't fully understood until now. It had been weeks since his rejection at the gallery, but the sting of that moment still lingered, though it was no longer the focal point of his thoughts. Instead, he had been consumed by his art, by the strange and powerful connection he had discovered. Every day, he felt the power in his paintings grow stronger, more refined. It was as if the act of painting itself was unlocking new dimensions of his potential. But Miles had begun to realize that this power wasn't just confined to his art, it was a part of him, and it was changing him. The more he explored his ability, the more his reality seemed to shift. His senses heightened to levels he had never experienced. Colors seemed brighter, sounds sharper, even the air around him felt different, charged, alive. His body felt lighter, almost weightless, as though his connection to this power was altering the very fabric of his being. But there was more, something he couldn't explain, something alien in the way his mind began to operate. It was a warm, late afternoon when the breakthrough came. Miles had been staring at one of his newest pieces, a large abstract work filled with jagged lines and swirling shapes that seemed to pulse with an energy of their own. His fingers hovered above the surface of the canvas, feeling the faint vibrations of the paint beneath his touch. But today was different. Today, as he reached out, something shifted, he could sense it, as if the painting was calling to him. Without thinking, Miles closed his eyes and placed his palm flat against the canvas. The world around him seemed to fall away. For a moment, there was nothing. No thoughts, no sounds, just an overwhelming feeling of weightlessness, as though he was floating between dimensions. Then, slowly, images began to form in his mind, images of ancient civilizations, vast stretches of uncharted lands, and strange symbols that glowed with an otherworldly light. The paintings he had created, he realized, were more than just abstract art. They were maps to forgotten knowledge, to powers buried deep within human history. His art was a key, a conduit to something far older than humanity itself. His breath caught in his throat as a memory, no, a vision, flashed before him. He saw a vast city, its streets lit with a pale blue light. The buildings rose high into the sky, their surfaces covered in intricate carvings that seemed to pulse with the same energy as his paintings. In the center of the city, a massive temple stood, towering over everything else. Its walls were adorned with murals that looked eerily similar to his own work. They depicted figures with glowing eyes, beings whose forms were both human and something else, something transcendent. And then, as if a veil had been lifted, he understood. The power that had been awakening within him wasn't just a personal gift, it was a part of something much larger. His art was not just a reflection of his own creativity, it was a continuation of an ancient, forgotten legacy. A legacy that had been hidden for millennia. The symbols, the glowing eyes, the cosmic energy, it all pointed to one thing: humanity's hidden potential, its true strength, had been suppressed for generations, buried beneath the weight of civilization. But now, through Miles, it was beginning to resurface. He pulled his hand back from the canvas, his heart pounding in his chest. The images faded as quickly as they had appeared, but the knowledge remained, etched into his mind like a map he had been born to discover. For the first time, Miles understood the true nature of his art. His paintings weren't just expressions of his emotions, they were portals to the forgotten powers of humanity, and he was the key to unlocking them. The energy he had been channeling through his brushstrokes was not just artistic, it was cosmic, a connection to the hidden force that had always been a part of human history but had been kept from the world. Miles stumbled back, his mind racing with the implications of what he had just experienced. The power was far greater than he had ever imagined. His paintings had always felt alive to him, but now he knew why. They were living things, imbued with energy that could alter reality itself. He glanced around his studio, the walls lined with his creations, now taking on an entirely new meaning. Each one was a map, a piece of the puzzle that he hadn't yet fully understood. But the answer was clear: he had been chosen, or perhaps born, to unlock this power, to bring it back to the world. But what did that mean for him? What did it mean for humanity? Miles didn't know the answers yet. But he knew that the world he had once known, the world that had rejected him, belittled his art, was about to change. This power wasn't meant to stay hidden, and he wasn't going to let it be suppressed again. He took a deep breath, his hands shaking slightly as he reached for his brushes once more. The next step was clear. His art would no longer be just for him, it would be a weapon. A weapon to bring humanity's hidden strength into the light, to show the world that there was so much more to them than they had ever realized. And as he dipped his brush into the paint, a part of him felt the weight of destiny settling over him. He wasn't just an artist anymore. He was the bearer of a secret that would change everything. His first step, he realized, was to return to the gallery, the very gallery that had dismissed him. He wasn't going back as the hopeful, rejected artist anymore. No, he was going back as something greater. He was going back to show them the truth. The truth about the power that had always been inside him, and inside humanity. The next morning, as the first light of dawn crept into his studio, Miles could feel a shift in the air. It was subtle, like the world had taken a collective breath and was waiting for something to happen. Something big. His mind raced as he cleaned his brushes, each stroke feeling different now, charged, alive with energy that was no longer just his own. Every fiber of his being seemed attuned to the power that had awakened within him. Miles had made a decision. He wasn't going to hide this newfound ability anymore. He wasn't going to cower in the shadows, hoping that the world would eventually notice him. No, this power was too significant. It was too important. And if the art world couldn't see it, then he would show them, force them to acknowledge the truth. He didn't know what the full extent of this power meant, but he was beginning to understand its potential. And the first place he needed to go was the very gallery that had rejected him, the one owned by Jessica Calloway. If she couldn't recognize the worth of his work before, then it was time for him to show her. It was time for the world to see what he had uncovered. As he stepped into the gallery, a familiar sense of unease washed over him. The same polished marble floors, the same stark white walls lined with art that felt lifeless to him now. He had once thought this place was the pinnacle, the very definition of success. But now, it felt small, constricting, like a cage that kept creativity bound to narrow, predefined limits. Jessica was at her desk, as expected. Her sharp eyes flicked up as he approached, but there was no immediate recognition. She was too busy flipping through paperwork, too caught up in her own world to notice the change in him. "Ms. Calloway," Miles said, his voice steady and strong, the confidence in it a stark contrast to the nervous, uncertain artist who had walked in here weeks ago. Jessica looked up from her tablet, a slight frown forming on her face. "You. I thought I told you we weren't accepting submissions." "I know," Miles said, his tone unwavering. "But I'm not here to submit anything. I'm here to show you something." Jessica's eyebrows rose in amusement, as if she couldn't quite place him. "Show me something?" she repeated, glancing him over with a dismissive glance. "I told you before, your work doesn't." "It does," Miles interrupted, his voice cutting through her condescension. "You just haven't seen it yet." Without waiting for her permission, he walked toward the nearest wall, where a blank canvas stood, untouched, ready for the next artist's hand. He set his portfolio down on the floor and opened it, revealing his latest piece. Jessica didn't react immediately. She was still staring at him as if he were a nuisance, a reminder of a failed attempt at validation. But Miles could feel it. He could feel the energy in the air, thrumming, building with each passing second. His hand brushed the surface of the canvas, and it responded. The power that had been dormant in him for so long surged forward, pouring itself into the brushstrokes. He began to paint. At first, Jessica said nothing. She watched with a mix of curiosity and skepticism, her arms crossed in front of her. But as Miles continued, something shifted. The colors on the canvas seemed to move, as if they were alive, twisting and swirling in ways they shouldn't. The red strokes darkened, deepened, and became a rich, vivid hue that seemed to pulse with life. The blue lines took on a luminous quality, glowing faintly beneath the stark white lights of the gallery. As the painting grew, so did the intensity of the air around them. The space felt charged, like static electricity building up before a storm. Jessica couldn't ignore it any longer. She stepped closer, her eyes narrowing as she tried to make sense of what was unfolding in front of her. But what she saw was unlike anything she had ever witnessed. The canvas was no longer just a surface for paint. It had become a window into something greater. Figures began to emerge from the swirling colors, shapes that were almost human, but not quite. Their eyes glowed with a faint light, their forms shifting and expanding, as though they were in constant motion, yet somehow frozen in time. The very air seemed to hum with an otherworldly energy as the painting came to life before their eyes. Jessica recoiled slightly, her face betraying a mix of confusion and fear. She opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. Her breath hitched as the figures on the canvas seemed to stretch beyond the edges of the painting, as if they were about to step out into the world. "This is what I've been telling you," Miles said, his voice calm, but full of certainty. "This is what you missed." My art isn't just paint on a canvas, it's a portal, a connection to something far beyond us. Something that has been hidden from the world for far too long. Jessica took a step back, her eyes wide with disbelief. What is this? She whispered, her voice barely audible. This, Miles said, pausing as he looked up at her, is humanity's true power. It's been here all along, buried beneath the surface, waiting to be unlocked. And now, I'm showing you what's been hidden. The room seemed to shudder, the very walls vibrating as the painting began to warp and stretch, the figures on the canvas becoming more distinct, more real. They were no longer confined to the boundaries of the frame, they were spilling out, filling the room with an energy so intense it felt almost tangible. Jessica stumbled back, her heart racing. Her mind was struggling to process what she was seeing. She had seen many talented artists in her time, but nothing like this. This wasn't just art, it was an event, a manifestation of something ancient and powerful. What do you want? Jessica finally managed to ask, her voice trembling. Miles met her gaze, his eyes burning with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. I want you to understand, he said simply. I want you to see that what you rejected wasn't just a painting. It was the future. And you're going to be part of it, whether you like it or not. The room fell silent, the painting now pulsing with a rhythm that was almost hypnotic. Jessica stood frozen, her mind reeling. She had rejected him, dismissed his work, thinking it lacked the sophistication she valued so much. But now, standing in front of him, with the artwork taking on a life of its own, she realized how wrong she had been. And in that moment, she understood something else. Miles wasn't just a rejected artist. He was something more, something much more dangerous. The power in his art was real, and it was only just beginning to show its true form. The silence that hung in the air was suffocating. The glowing figures on the canvas continued to shift and pulse, their presence filling the room with an energy that felt both electrifying and terrifying. Jessica stood motionless, her mind grappling with the impossible. The art she had once dismissed, the work she had rejected for its supposed lack of depth, now held a power that seemed to transcend anything she had ever seen or understood. She could feel the temperature in the room rising, the air thickening as if the very atmosphere was charged with an invisible force. The painting on the canvas was no longer simply a work of art, it had become a living thing, a manifestation of an ancient, unspoken power that was beginning to unfold before her eyes. The figures in the painting were no longer confined to their two-dimensional existence. They were real, their glowing eyes fixed on Jessica as though they were aware of her presence, of her disbelief. The sensation was overwhelming. Jessica took a step back, her breath shallow as her pulse quickened. What is this? She whispered again, her voice trembling. What have you done? Miles, standing in the center of the room, seemed completely at ease, his gaze unwavering as he watched the power of his creation unfold. His eyes, once filled with uncertainty and self-doubt, now gleamed with a quiet intensity. The transformation within him was undeniable. He had gone from a struggling artist, yearning for validation, to something much greater, a conduit for something beyond human comprehension. I haven't done anything, Miles replied calmly, his voice steady but laced with an undeniable confidence. This has always been within me. Within all of us. I'm just the one who's finally unlocked it. Jessica couldn't tear her eyes away from the painting, even as she tried to make sense of the reality unfolding around her. She felt small, insignificant, as if the very ground beneath her feet were shifting, threatening to swallow her whole. The power in the room was undeniable, and for the first time in her life, she felt the weight of something far greater than her own understanding of the world. Miles continued, his voice growing stronger with each word. You saw my work before, Jessica. You thought it was nothing more than colors and shapes. But I've come to realize that it's much more. These aren't just abstract forms. They're the remnants of an ancient power, a power that humanity has been suppressing for centuries. It's in our DNA. In our very bones. Jessica's heart raced, but her mind still couldn't fully grasp the enormity of what he was saying. The world she had once believed in, the world of galleries, critics, and accolades, now seemed trivial, irrelevant. She had spent her life in a bubble, surrounding herself with artists who fit the mold of what she thought great art was supposed to be. But now, standing in front of Miles and his living, breathing creation, she realized just how narrow her view had been. "Why me?" Jessica asked, her voice barely above a whisper, her eyes still fixed on the painting. "Why show me this? Why bring me into this?" Miles took a step closer, his gaze never leaving hers. "Because you rejected it," he said simply. "You saw something powerful and chose to dismiss it. But now, you have a choice. You can either continue to ignore what's right in front of you, or you can accept it, accept the truth of what humanity is capable of when we finally unlock our potential." Jessica felt a chill run down her spine as his words sank in. The truth of what he was saying was becoming clearer, and yet, it terrified her. She had spent years building a career in an industry that was based on validation, on finding the right kind of art. But Miles' work wasn't just art. It was a force, a catalyst for something much larger. The glowing figures on the canvas continued to shift, their eyes following her every movement. The power in the room grew, expanding beyond the boundaries of the painting. The walls seemed to pulse with energy, vibrating with a low hum that felt like it was resonating deep within her chest. Jessica could feel it now, the power that Miles had unlocked, the power that he was tapping into. It was as though the painting was alive, breathing, calling to something deep inside her. "You're afraid," Miles said, his voice softening, as if sensing her inner turmoil. "But you don't have to be. The power is within all of us. It's just been hidden. Suppressed. Buried under centuries of lies and limitations. And now, it's time for humanity to reclaim it." Jessica's mind reeled as his words echoed in her thoughts. She had always believed in the importance of control, of keeping things neat, orderly, within the boundaries of what was acceptable. But this power that Miles had unlocked, this wasn't something that could be controlled. It was wild, untamed, and it was threatening to spill over the edges of everything she had known. For a long moment, Jessica stood frozen, torn between fear and awe. The energy in the room felt alive, pulsing with an intensity she had never encountered. She could feel the pressure building within her, the weight of Miles' words pressing on her chest. She could feel the temptation, the pull, to accept what he was offering. To accept the truth. And yet, a small part of her hesitated. She wasn't sure she was ready for this. She wasn't sure she could fully grasp the implications of what she was being asked to embrace. This wasn't just about art. It wasn't about the gallery or the art world, it was about something far greater. Something dangerous. "What happens now?" she asked, her voice shaking slightly. "What are you going to do with this power?" Miles' gaze never faltered. "I'm going to show the world what we're truly capable of. I'm going to reveal the truth, everything that's been hidden for centuries. This isn't just about me anymore. It's about all of us. Humanity's true potential. We're not just creators, we're beings of power. And it's time for that to be known." The figures in the painting seemed to grow more solid, more defined, as if they were listening to his words, agreeing with them. The air thickened further, vibrating with a force that was almost unbearable. The power was growing, expanding beyond the confines of the room. Jessica's heart raced as she took a step back, but her eyes remained fixed on the painting. She could feel the energy, could feel the world shifting around her as the truth unfolded before her eyes. The question no longer was whether she understood what was happening, it was whether she was ready to accept it. And as Miles' words echoed in her ears, Jessica realized the truth was undeniable. This was just the beginning. The room was suffused with an electric tension, as though the very air had become thick with the potential of something monumental. The energy from the painting was almost palpable, pressing in on Jessica from all sides. She could feel it in her chest, the rhythm of her heart syncing with the pulse of the artwork. The walls seemed to bend in and out, as if they, too, were alive, breathing with the energy that was emanating from Miles' work. She couldn't look away. She didn't know if she even wanted to. Miles stood before her, an unshakable confidence radiating from him. He had become something else, something beyond the artist she had first encountered. The young man who had once shown up in her gallery, desperate for recognition, was gone. In his place stood someone who understood something far greater than the art world's narrow definitions of success. He was a vessel now, channeling a power that was both ancient and terrifying. But what did it mean? What did it mean for her, for the world? Do you understand now? Miles asked, his voice low, but filled with an undeniable gravity. He wasn't asking her to just see the power in the room, he was asking her to accept it. To embrace it. This power is real. It's been within us all along, and it's not just in the art. It's in everything, the way we think, the way we create, the way we live. It's the unspoken strength of humanity. Jessica opened her mouth to respond, but no words came out. She wasn't sure what to say. The implications of his words were too vast, too overwhelming for her to process all at once. She had spent her life in an industry that prided itself on judgment, on control, on limiting what was considered worthy. And now, standing in front of her, was a man who had tapped into something that defied all of those boundaries. Miles wasn't just offering her a glimpse into a new form of art. He was offering her the chance to see the world differently, to understand that humanity, as a species, had barely scratched the surface of its true potential. I don't know if I can accept this, Jessica said, her voice barely above a whisper. She had always prided herself on her ability to make sense of things. Art was supposed to be about meaning, about understanding. But this, it wasn't just about meaning. It was about something far more primal, more real. And she was terrified of it. That's the choice we all face, Jessica, Miles said, his voice soft but firm. You can choose to turn away. You can keep pretending that the world we've created is enough, that the small, comfortable reality we've built for ourselves is all there is. Or you can choose to face the truth. You can choose to embrace what humanity is capable of when we stop suppressing our true strength. Jessica's mind raced as she looked from the glowing painting to Miles. The choice was becoming clearer, but no easier. She could see the fear in his eyes, the fear that came with knowing that the power he had unlocked was more than just an idea. It was a living, breathing force that couldn't be controlled. But he had chosen to accept it. And now, he was asking her to do the same. The gallery was silent, the hum of the energy around them growing louder, vibrating with an intensity that made her feel both alive and small at the same time. Jessica took a step back, her feet unsteady as her mind fought to grasp the magnitude of what was happening. I've spent my life building this place, she said, almost to herself. I've dedicated everything to creating a space where art is seen for what it is, valuable, worthy of recognition. But if this power is real, then everything I've believed in, everything I've worked for, her voice trailed off. Miles watched her carefully, his expression unreadable. You don't have to throw everything away, Jessica. You just have to expand your understanding. The power in my art, this power in humanity, it's not about destruction. It's about evolution. It's about seeing beyond what's in front of us, seeing the potential we've always had but have been too afraid to acknowledge. Jessica closed her eyes for a moment, trying to focus on her thoughts, trying to make sense of the chaos inside her mind. But the truth kept pressing in on her, urging her to see beyond her own limitations. She had built her career on seeing art as a form of validation, a way to prove worth. But what if worth didn't come from recognition at all? What if worth came from understanding, from tapping into something far deeper and more intrinsic? She thought of the paintings she had dismissed in the past, of the artists whose work she had judged as too abstract, too raw, too unconventional. What if they had been trying to express something beyond their own experiences? What if their work, like Miles, was an invitation to see the world differently, to tap into a hidden strength that had been buried for centuries? The walls around her seemed to pulse, the air vibrating with the unspoken truth. Humanity wasn't just a species that had learned to create. It was a species that had learned to suppress, to bury its true potential beneath layers of comfort and fear. And now, it was time for that to change. Time for it to break free. I can't just walk away from this, Jessica said, her voice trembling with uncertainty. But I'm not sure I'm ready for what this means. Miles took a step closer, his eyes softening as he looked at her. None of us are ready, Jessica. But that's the point. We've been living in a world built on limits, built on fear of the unknown. And now, the unknown is staring us in the face, daring us to step into it. All we have to do is choose. Jessica's heart pounded in her chest. The choice was terrifying. It was everything she had built her life around, all the neat boxes of art, of expectations, suddenly turning to dust in the face of something far greater. But she could feel it now, the truth of it. The power in her own heart. The power that had always been there, waiting to be seen. I'm not sure I can walk away, she said quietly. But I need to understand. I need to see more. I need to know what this truly means for the world. Miles nodded, his expression resolute. Then let me show you. We don't have to figure it all out today. But we can start the journey together. And with those words, the painting pulsed one last time, its figures glowing brighter than ever before, as though they were acknowledging the shift that had just occurred. The world was changing, and they were going to be part of it. The silence in the gallery was deafening, a heavy stillness that seemed to stretch on forever. The painting, glowing with an otherworldly brilliance, cast its light over the room, filling the space with an ethereal glow. Jessica stood at the center of it all, her breath shallow, her mind spinning with the weight of the choice she had just made. She had stepped into the unknown, into a new reality, and there was no turning back. Miles stood beside her, his presence calm but unshakable. The energy in the room had shifted again, deepened, as if the very air itself had come to life. The figures in the painting seemed to move, their shapes now pulsing with an intensity that was almost tangible. They no longer felt like mere symbols of power, they felt alive, as though they were reaching out to her, to them both, inviting them to step further into the world that was unfolding before their eyes. We're here now, Miles said softly, his voice low but filled with a quiet strength. There's no going back, Jessica. We've unlocked something. A power that's been hidden within us all along. Jessica nodded slowly, her heart still racing. She had felt it, the shift in her own consciousness, the way her perception of the world had expanded in an instant. She had always believed in the power of art to inspire, to challenge, but she had never imagined it could unleash such a force. The truth that Miles had shown her was both exhilarating and terrifying. The boundaries of what she had once known were now crumbling, leaving her standing at the edge of something vast, something infinite. This isn't just about art, Jessica said, her voice filled with awe. It's about us, isn't it? It's about what we're truly capable of. Miles turned to her, his gaze steady and unwavering. Exactly. It's not just about creating beautiful things. It's about uncovering the power that's been suppressed within us. It's about tapping into something that goes beyond what we've been told is possible. The figures in the painting shifted once more, their movements becoming more pronounced, more deliberate. Jessica could feel the power radiating from them, a force that seemed to hum in the very air around her. The truth Miles had unlocked was no longer something abstract or theoretical, it was alive, it was real, and it was growing stronger by the moment. This isn't just something that can exist in a gallery, Jessica murmured, her mind racing with possibilities. This is the future. The next step for humanity. This power, this potential, it's in all of us, isn't it? Miles nodded, his eyes gleaming with conviction. Yes. We've been living in a world of limits, of expectations, of fear. But that's all changing now. We've unlocked something that transcends all of that. Jessica felt a surge of emotion. She had always believed in art's ability to transform, but this was something else entirely. This wasn't just a message to be conveyed, it was a revolution. A revolution of consciousness, of potential. It was the beginning of something far bigger than she could have ever imagined. What happens now? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. She was still processing the enormity of what she had just stepped into. She had made her choice, but she couldn't help but wonder what the world would look like now that this hidden strength had been unleashed. What would people do with this power? How would humanity respond? We take it to the world, Miles said, his voice resolute. We show them what they've been missing. We teach them what it means to unlock their true potential. This isn't just about the art world anymore. This is about humanity as a whole. Jessica's heart swelled with a mixture of excitement and fear. She had never imagined that her life would lead to something like this, that she would be standing on the precipice of a new reality, one that could change everything. The power that Miles had unlocked wasn't just about creating or owning art, it was about transforming the world, about seeing humanity's true capabilities and embracing them without fear. But with that realization came a new question: what will the world do when they see this? When they understand the truth that Miles had uncovered? Jessica wasn't sure, but she knew one thing: it would never be the same again. Together, they stepped forward, their footsteps echoing through the gallery. The painting, still glowing, seemed to pulse in time with their movements, as though it, too, was aware of the shift that was taking place. The figures on the canvas were no longer just representations of power, they were a symbol of what humanity could become, a reflection of the strength that had always been there, waiting to be unlocked. Jessica felt a sense of purpose, of clarity, that she had never experienced before. She had spent her life searching for meaning in the world of art, but now she saw that meaning was not something to be found, it was something to be created. The power was within them, within everyone, just waiting to be realized. As they moved toward the door, the glow from the painting dimmed slightly, but its power was still felt, lingering in the air like a promise. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: they had begun something that could not be undone. Humanity's hidden strength had been unleashed, and there was no turning back. "Let's go," Miles said, his voice filled with purpose. Jessica nodded, a small but determined smile playing on her lips. The world is about to change. And together, they stepped out into the unknown, ready to show humanity its true potent.